Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives.
Next up, we have Jesse Hudson. Jesse is an anthropologist and attorney working in the psychedelic space since 2007. He is a member of the Chacruna Council for Protection of Sacred Plants, board member at Sage Institute for Psychedelic Therapy, advisor to Enthea Health, and mentor in the SSDP psychedelic pipeline. He has worked with the Matsegenga and the Shipibo-Canibo tribes in the Peruvian Amazon, published peer-reviewed papers on the legal frameworks for psychedelics, and counseled several psychedelic-assisted therapy clinics. He helped ICEERS launch and develop the Ayahuasca Defense Fund and co-authored annual ESG and CSR benchmarkings of thousands of companies with Development International. Jesse has a bachelor's from the University of Colorado Boulder and a law degree from Tulane Law School. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Psych.
Hi, thanks for having me. Appreciate being here and having the opportunity to share about one of my favorite subjects in the world, which is socially responsible investing. I have this theory that everybody's an investor, whether you're investing capital or labor or land or time or any of the other factors of production in classical economic theory. You're spending something on the things you're doing. And so the question is, when it comes to a space like this that is increasingly commodified and capitalized, how do we make conscious decisions or socially responsible decisions as investors? And the answers are pretty variable depending upon who you ask and where you go to. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is take us through a series of laws that require corporations to disclose their social responsibility or their environmental and social and governance criteria to the public. They have to put it out there in a report or some kind of disclosure statement. And then the public has the opportunity to audit those reports based upon what they find important. So, what criteria are material to me as a member of the public, a stakeholder in the psychedelics ecosystem, or one step further as a shareholder in psychedelics companies. And then take those public reports and compare them against one another and say, okay, has this company done better than this other company? Who is the most responsible company in the space right now? And you'll find if you swim a little bit in this space of socially responsible investing, what they call SRI, there's a whole industry devoted to analyzing these factors, publishing information about these factors, and educating investors on how to make investment decisions or making those decisions for them. For example, if you go to the website Just Capital, it's a company an SRI firm started by Deepak Chopra and Arianna Huffington and some other big name conscious investors, you could say, conscious capitalists. And they're focused on aggregating these indicators and ranking companies accordingly. And they actually have an ETF publicly traded under the ticker JUST, J-U-S-T. And the ETF pools all of these socially responsible companies into it and then allows for investors to just buy the ETF in order to express their vote with their dollar of support for socially responsible business or business with environmental, social, governance rankings. And so as it comes to this thing, there's this kind of question that arises. And it's like, okay, but are they telling the truth? Is it shaman or is it sham? Is it fake or is it a bunch of bullshit? Or is it actually actionable information and intelligence that can inform investment decisions and actually provide a good return on investment? It's all well and good if a company is following socially responsible guidelines, but unless they're making a return for their stakeholders or their shareholders, then investment will go elsewhere, in theory. So how do we ensure that companies in the psychedelic space are being held to standards as high as their consumers' standards, that is, not their consumers being high. Not that that's wrong. Actually, in fact, it may be very nice. So let's dive in. The basic premise here is that the factors of production in economics and in capitalism include not only capital, but time and labor. Therefore, the definition of capitalism is a little broader than a lot of us think. And in fact, the definition of capitalism should be redefined into what fits for the 21st century. And in 2006, when Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Prize in economics for his work on microcredit and microfinance systems at Grameen Bank, he devoted his speech to the idea that we must redefine capitalism as making money solving social problems. Rather than just a pure profit motive, it's a profit motive for a purpose, profit with a purpose, stakeholder capitalism. And he advanced this idea of a social enterprise, a business that is incorporated as a for-profit, but nevertheless has some kind of public benefit. And we'll get more on that later, because there have been some interesting developments in the public benefit corporation world here in the United States, where I'm located in a shed. So looking broadly at the psychedelics market now, any astute observer can say, well, it's about more than money. You know, there's criticism of large corporations that have made moves that people don't like, or they've issued statements publicly that people disagree with, and pitchforks have come out, and people have been ostracized, and criticisms have been levied, which is all a sign of a very healthy market, and I encourage. But it's clear that if you look at that, it's about more than just making money in this market. It's about changing the world, making the world a better place. Because psychedelics present kind of a new paradigm, a little bit of a shift in the state of mind, and therefore the state of business and the state of capitalism. And so what psychedelics and the emergence of psychedelic capitalism presents to us is an opportunity to follow through on what Muhammad Yunus asked us to do in 2006 when he won the Nobel Prize in economics, and redefine capitalism. So how do we redefine it? Well, one way is by thinking more broadly than just the stockholder and look at the stakeholders as well. So the people who aren't just investing capital, but are investing time and labor, a caring consumer base of the psychedelic industry. And you know, what's the problem here, and what problem is psychedelics solving? If it's making money solving social problems, then what's the problem we're solving? That problem is outlined in Goal 3 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages, right? Problem is people are sick, and we want to help them with psychedelics. They're proven to be breakthrough therapies for multiple scourges of the modern mind: PTSD, addiction, depression, treatment-resistant depression. And you've seen the US FDA announce again and again and again that a psychedelic is a breakthrough therapy. 2017, they said ketamine is a breakthrough therapy for treatment-resistant depression. And then in March 2019, it was approved for public use. In 2017, the FDA also designated MDMA a breakthrough therapy, but for PTSD. And it's expected to be on the market in 2 years. 2018, psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. 2019, psilocybin for major depressive disorder, a much broader subset of depression, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's more than 2,100 clinical trials for the top 7 or 8 psychedelic medicines or molecules. And that's a lot. It's poised for the emergence of a new industry. And so there is a chance to help ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages, Goal 3 of the SDGs. with psychedelics. And in order to do that and achieve that, we want to look at how to make sure psychedelics companies that are pushing the industry forward are doing so in a manner that is honoring that goal and responsible, right? As an investor, whatever kind of investor you are, whether it's time, capital, or whatever else, you want to make sure that they're actually doing right. And then the question is, well, why redefine capitalism? Why not use a new word like socialism or anarcho-capitalism or libertarianism? And the answer comes from wisdom from a Native American author, N. Scott Momaday, who in 1969 published a book called House Made of Dawn, which won the Pulitzer Prize and is widely credited for bringing Native American literature into the mainstream. And he wrote, "They have assumed the names and gestures of their enemies, but have held on to their own secret souls. And in this, there is a resistance and an overcoming, a long outwaiting." So the idea here is we use those words that are loaded, like psychedelics. Why not entheogens? Like capitalism. Why not libertarianism? Precisely because those are the names and gestures of the things that we want to change. And so by changing those words, we change the semantic baggage and potentially we can help change the world. The reality is that in order to go about redefining capitalism to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages, we have to use these most powerful tools of the current system to change it. The first tool, perhaps the number one tool, is shareholder primacy, right? Corporations answer to their shareholders. Corporations say, we're allowed to ravage the environment or, hire a non-diverse board because we're beholden to our shareholders. That's the general excuse for bad behavior. And in fact, a really good example of this is in a series called The Unincorporated Man by Eitan and Danny Colin, Kollin, not Colon. And it's a series of 4 books, science fiction, set about 300 years in the future, when everybody is born an incorporated person. So every single person is like a business, has shares. 25% of those shares are owned by the government. Some are owned by family, and through their life, they sell shares of themselves to businesses and colleges to fund their lives. And they've created a pretty harmonious society as a result, because there's this self-interest in being a shareholder of other people, and when you hold a share of someone else, you care about them. There's a certain sense of harmony. And so the vision put forth in the Unincorporated Man series of shareholder primacy is a kind of shareholder primacy that works. But that's fiction, right? What's reality? In reality, how do we use this tool of shareholder primacy to our advantage as revolutionaries redefining capitalism? Well, turns out people have been thinking about this same question for many years. In 2013 in Delaware, the Delaware Secretary of State implemented a new rule passed by the Delaware judiciary and government, creating a new kind of corporate entity called the Public Benefit Corporation, or PBC. As somebody interested in psychedelics and the psychedelics industry, you've probably heard of it. In MAPS created a PBC to handle basically the MDMA rollout, while MAPS has a nonprofit that did everything up until now and funds the research, etc. Other examples of PBCs in the psychedelic space are Enthea, Maya, 2 Mayas actually, one in Colorado and one in San Francisco, spelled a little differently, one with a Y and one with an I. And so what each of these corporations is doing, potentially, is creating an accountability system focused on shareholder primacy. So how does that work? A PBC has in its operating document, its organizational document, a stated special purpose. And every other year, they have to report to all their shareholders what they've done to try to achieve that stated special purpose. So say you're a psychedelics healthcare company, and your stated special purpose is getting psychedelics into the hands of underserved communities. Every other year, you have to report to your shareholders what you've done to do that. And if you fail to do that, if you fail to achieve or you fail to report, the shareholders can sue the directors for failing to take appropriate action to achieve the public benefit. Pretty good, yeah? So if you have a caring shareholder, say you own a share of MAPS PVC, which is not possible because MAPS PVC is wholly owned by MAPS nonprofit, which is actually a little problematic and obviates the whole PVC structure, right? Because it's focused on accountability through shareholder primacy and shareholder derivative lawsuits against directors. But theoretically, if you were a shareholder of MAPS, you could sue if new directors come and they start corrupting the organization and say, we're going to be for profit only, and we're going to take away this, public benefit that we wanted. So as you can see, even the theory is there, but the reality is not so pretty. In MAPS, for example, only people who are members of the nonprofit will be able to sue the PBC to hold it to account. In other organizations like the Mayas and Thea, perhaps it's a little bit different. But at any rate, it's not always effective. And a big problem is that disclosure report that happens every other year, it only goes to the shareholders, right? It doesn't go to the broader public. So people like you or I, if we're not shareholders of MAPS, or we're not shareholders of the Mayas, or we're not shareholders of Enthea, we have no say really in the operating mode of the organization, which sucks. We can do investigative journalism and name and shame, but it's not as effective. So what else can we do? We use the second most powerful tool, or perhaps more powerful according to who you ask, which is consumerism. Because of consumerism, consumers are stakeholders in companies. The voice of the consumer is spoken in dollars and in this naming and shaming in the media. As a consumer, we can do investigative journalism. We can name and shame companies that are doing wrong, and we can hopefully affect some kind of change. So when you have stakeholder primacy as implemented through shareholder derivative lawsuits, and you have consumerism with consumers as stakeholders, their voices spoken through dollars, and media naming and shaming, you have two pretty good tools. But the third tool, which is something that I love as a trained attorney, is law. And all over the world in the past decade, disclosure laws based on corporate social responsibility and environmental and social guidelines have been emerging. Maybe it's to do with some kind of global awakening. And these laws empower not only the shareholders, who can sue for material misrepresentations or failure to have a plan, but also stakeholders, both citizens and the government, to hold corporations to account. This idea of a citizen lawsuit, which is enshrined in environmental laws throughout the country, is also implemented in these corporate disclosure laws or corporate social responsibility laws, which allows an ordinary citizen to hold a corporation to account for failure to achieve some kind of public benefit, specifically required by these disclosure laws. In other words, disclosure laws allow socially responsible shareholders to make informed investment decisions about things that are material to them, such as diversity, such as impact on indigenous peoples. And examples of these laws, which you can find detailed analysis of that I did with Development International, and you can find that on developmentinternational.org, are Dodd-Frank Section 1502, which requires all publicly listed companies in the US to make sure that they don't have tin, tungsten, tantalum, and gold, which includes coltan, the stuff in iPhones and computers, coming from warring regions, basically, child soldiers and slaves in the Democratic Republic of Congo and that area. And in order to do that, they have to disclose what kind of due diligence they did to make sure that they check their supply chains and made sure that they're not buying minerals that are from suspicious sources. And they publish annually a disclosure report that you or I can look at. You can go on the SEC's website, you can go to the company's website and look at their disclosure report, see what they did. And that allows members of the public, like myself, when I did these audits of these companies and benchmarkings of these companies, to rank them against each other and say, okay, this one is better than that one. And then send that information to Just Capital, who then puts it out to the investing public and allows people to invest in the companies that are doing well. Another law is the California Transparency and Supply Chains Act, CATISCA, which is an anti-slavery law, anti-human trafficking law, which requires California companies of a certain size or companies doing business in California to issue a similar disclosure statement based on their anti-slavery due diligence. Make sure that in their supply chains, they don't have slaves producing products, because it's widespread, right? Today, now, there are more people in slavery than at any point in human history. And they're producing your clothes and your phones and even food like bumblebee tuna. So the problem is real, right? And these laws are designed to try to help resolve that problem. Another law is the UK Modern Slavery Act, very much the same kind of thing. And a much broader law from the EU as a whole is called the EU Non-Financial Reporting Directive. And what that does is it requires companies to annually submit not only financial reports, but non-financial reports on what they've done for environmental protection and social responsibility, treatment of employees, respect for human rights, anti-corruption and anti-bribery, and the diversity on their company boards. And so as you can see, what is emerging out of the collective consciousness in the past decade, and less really, the past 5 or 6 years, is this intentional push towards holding corporations to more account, aka redefining capitalism. 10 years after Muhammad Yunus gave his seminal speech for his Nobel Prize in economics. So it's good progress, for sure, but can the progress be better? For sure. And how does that apply to psychedelics? Psychedelics is not conflict minerals. It's not slavery in supply chains. Maybe the non-financial reporting directive can, sure. The fourth tool, other than shareholder primacy, consumerism, and law, this fourth tool is actually a tool from the new system, not from the old system that we're looking to change. And it's the tool of self-regulation. In other words, how do we, as investors and stakeholders and shareholders and founders and entrepreneurs, regulate ourselves? Because the more we regulate ourselves, the less we get regulated by other people. Like the Seattle Chaz, the temporary autonomous zone in downtown Seattle. It's a self-regulatory zone. And from people who are writing on Reddit from the area, it's apparently a peaceful area, more peaceful than when the police were there, right? Regulating them. They're regulating themselves now. And so how does self-regulation apply in psychedelics? Because laws are ineffective when government gets in the way. If you have an unwilling to prosecute government, or one that is bought by lobbying with loopholes in the disclosure laws, or just not enforcing disclosure laws because the politicians are bought, or they just don't have resources or time. Tool 2, consumerism, it's ineffective when people don't want to buy things. They want to create self-sustaining generative systems like permaculture design and permaculture systems. And tool 1 is ineffective when shareholders, tool 1, shareholder primacy, is ineffective when shareholders are not socially conscious or willing to act. You have a PBC with a bunch of nefarious bad actor shareholders, they're never going to hold the corporation to account for failure to achieve its public benefit, right? So what do we do in the face of all those tools that don't work? We use this other tool, self-regulation. And 2 examples of that in psychedelics existent today are the Open Science Statement from Bob Jesse and co, and the North Star Ethics Pledge, which you can find on their website. But honestly, as speaking from my experience evaluating corporations for their disclosures and seeing how many just wriggle through and say a bunch of bullshit and that they don't really mean, or have statements that they're not really backing up and no way anybody can really sue them, is that these statements, the Open Science Statement and the North Star Ethics Pledge, they're not enough. You have to have actionable material disclosures published at least annually, maybe quarterly, that require companies, right, to submit public reports to a caring consumer base, a group of investors, not only of time, but also of money and labor, shareholders and stakeholders, so that they can review those reports and make educated and informed investment decisions. So I'm proud to say that I'm collaborating with North Star on developing these reporting criteria for companies that will, in phase 2 of the North Star process, be certified as kind of a B corporation for psychedelics, based on the criteria in the EU Non-Financial Reporting Directive, Dodd-Frank Section 1502, the UK Modern Slavery Act, and the California Transparency and Supply Chains Act, in order to, again, hold psychedelic corporations to standards as high as their consumers. So how do we do that? First step is we're doing a stakeholder forum to determine which criteria, environmental and social and governance criteria, ESG criteria, are material to socially responsible investors in psychedelics, in the broad sense, both stockholders and stakeholders in the psychedelic community. For example, what's a material consideration for you if you're investing in a psychedelic drug development company? If the company's doing bioprospecting in the Amazon, do you want them to describe their relationship with indigenous peoples and intellectual property and what they're doing to improve protections for that? Is that material to you as an investor in psychedelics? That's the kind of stuff I want to hear. And I encourage you to submit to me any factors that you consider material in your investment decisions that are non-financial. So environmental, social, etc. And you can email me at Hudson, Hudson, at Vine, VINE, .vc, Hudson@vine.vc. Another example is like, what's material to you if you're investing in a psychedelic clinic company, like Field Trip, which now has a drug discovery arm, yeah, but initially a clinic company, or initially a venture capital fund, whatever. Is it diverse racial representation among clinicians so that they can serve underserved communities? If that's material to you, then I want to hear it, because those factors of material importance to investors are what in turn will be required in companies' annual disclosure statements in psychedelics. So that ultimately, down the line, we have a self-regulatory system where companies are submitting public disclosures to a caring consumer base that can then audit them and rank them against each other and make socially informed investment decisions to ultimately achieve this special purpose of this whole thing, which is healing the world. Tikkun Olam. And that's it.
Thanks so much, Jesse.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jesse. Really appreciate it. We're pretty much out of time. If there's any quick questions from the audience, would be happy to take those. The only other thing that I wanted to ask was, both of us have contributed some time to the decentralized governance space, to the blockchain space. I was hoping you could share, are any of those technologies something that you feel like can be plugged into this ecosystem as well? And if yes, how? And if not, why not?
It's a good question. I mean, the core ethos of decentralization and of cryptocurrency is immediately relevant here. You have this idea where people are empowered instead of centralized entities. And that kind of thing is a very kind of psychedelic thing. And it can apply immediately when you're talking about like organizations that are operating in a gray market or a legal gray area that want to remain anonymous, but nevertheless want to have accountability and mechanisms for dispersing proceeds. Or you have governance structures and consensus mechanisms that are well designed and well thought out. Because anybody who's engaged in the crypto economy will tell you there's a lot of thinking about governance and corporate design and accountability and transparency and how to make those things apply. So, I mean, I think immediately the ethos of cryptocurrency in general is applicable to psychedelics. But what I like to say is that the two are really the same thing in what they achieve, which is liberation. Psychedelics help liberate your mind. Cryptocurrency helps liberate your finances. Mm-hmm. So they're liberating technologies, both of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing. Really appreciate it, man. And looking forward to talking more soon.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, peace, man. Be well.